Judge me if you want, but tell me what a wife is supposed to do when her husband stops reacting to her. My name is Simone Hale. I am 39, and I teach teenagers how to hold an audience, so technically, I understand the difference between cruelty and a joke. Nathan had become my quiet husband, the serious one who treated every emotion like a problem he could solve later. I only mentioned other men because jealousy was the last thing that proved I still mattered to him. People were already laughing when I said his best friend would be my first choice. Nathan only straightened the brass bell and asked who else had heard me. At the school gala, I planned to give him the reaction he had denied me for years. My name is Simone Hale. I am 39, and I teach drama at a high school, so technically, I understand the difference between cruelty and a joke. Nathan had become my quiet husband, the serious one who treated every emotion like a problem he could solve after work. I never wanted another man. I only mentioned them because jealousy was the last thing that proved I could still reach him. People were already laughing whenever I teased him, so I saw no reason to stop. At the school gala, I planned to give him the reaction he had denied me for years. Nathan had not always been cold. During the first years of our marriage, we spent almost every Friday evening at a small comedy club near the river. The rooms smelled of old carpet and fried food, and the stage lights made every performer look slightly nervous. Nathan laughed more easily then. After each show, we returned home, made tea, and judged our own jokes with a small brass dinner bell we had bought at a flea market. 1 ring meant weak. 2 rings meant funny. Nathan usually rang twice for me, even when my joke was not good enough. I liked the sound because it meant he was listening. After his promotion, the comedy nights slowly disappeared. Nathan worked in corporate compliance, which meant he spent his days finding risks before they became problems. Soon he began treating our marriage the same way. If I said we never spent time together, he opened his calendar and suggested a free weekend 3 months later. If I told him I felt lonely, he asked whether I wanted to book a short trip. He always offered a solution. He rarely offered himself. The serious one still made coffee every morning and attended every school play I directed. After each final performance, he left a handwritten note inside my script. But at home, he could sit beside me for an hour without asking what I was thinking. Silence had followed me since childhood. I was the middle child, the one my mother remembered when something went wrong or when I made the family laugh. My older sister won awards. My younger brother needed protection. I learned early that attention had to be created. Calm rooms made me feel invisible. So when marriage became quiet, I began creating small problems just to see whether Nathan would look up. At first, the jokes were harmless. I hid his car keys inside the bread cabinet and watched him search for them before work. When he became irritated, I returned them and told him he needed to relax. Another time, I changed the language on his phone and pretended the device had been hacked. He spent 10 minutes checking his accounts before I laughed and fixed it. Nathan asked why I enjoyed making ordinary mornings harder. I said life with him needed a little energy. He called it unnecessary. I called it personality. Once I told him I had booked a weekend trip during our anniversary without checking his schedule. He immediately opened his work calendar and started moving meetings. When I admitted there was no trip, he closed the laptop and stared at me. He asked whether making him rearrange his week had been the whole joke. I told him the funny part was how quickly the serious one reacted. He did not laugh. That was the problem. Money irritated him. Changed plans exhausted him. Public teasing made him withdraw. None of it produced the emotion I wanted. I did not want a polite complaint. I wanted proof. One evening, I found it by accident. Nathan and I were sitting in the living room after dinner. He was reading something on his tablet while I scrolled through my phone. I mentioned that an attractive man at a coffee shop had offered me his number. Nathan's hand stopped above the screen. He looked directly at me for the first time that evening and asked whether I had accepted it. The question came too quickly. I said the man had written it on the back of my receipt. Nathan asked where the receipt was. I told him I had thrown it away. His face remained controlled, but the muscles near his jaw tightened. I enjoyed that small change more than I should have. He asked whether I planned to contact the man. I kept the story alive for another few seconds, then laughed and admitted nobody had given me a number. Nathan placed his tablet on the table. He carefully straightened the two coasters between us until their edges matched. Then he asked why I had invented the story. I said I wanted to know whether he still cared. He told me there were healthier ways to ask. I replied that healthier ways usually ended with him opening a calendar or offering to repair something. Nathan asked whether frightening him had made me feel better. I said he was exaggerating. Technically, there had been no man and no number, so no real harm existed. He did not argue. He only straightened the coasters again and asked who else I had told. I said nobody. Later that night, I saw him standing near the hallway window, sending a message to his mother. I assumed he was complaining because he needed someone to confirm that I was difficult. Of course, Marianne would agree with him. She had always treated Nathan's silence like maturity and my energy like a problem that needed lowering. The next morning, Nathan placed the brass dinner bell inside a drawer instead of leaving it on the shelf. I asked why he was hiding it. He said it no longer felt funny. I told him one failed joke did not erase years of good ones. He answered that the problem was not the joke. It was the reason I needed it. That sentence annoyed me because it sounded like something a therapist would say before charging for another hour. I opened the drawer, took the bell out, and rang it twice. Nathan looked at me but said nothing. That was enough. The cheating story had produced more emotion than every hidden key, fake trip, or changed phone setting combined. I had finally discovered the one subject that could pull my husband out of his calmness. Nathan could ignore jokes about his age. He could survive being called boring. But the thought of another man reached him immediately. From then on, whenever the quiet became too heavy, I knew exactly which button to press. Once I understood that jealousy could reach Nathan, I began using it whenever the silence between us became too heavy. At first, I kept the jokes small. I mentioned that a younger teacher had complimented my dress in the staff room. I told Nathan the new athletic director always found a reason to stand beside me during school meetings. When he asked whether either man had crossed a line, I smiled and said technically nothing had happened. I only wanted to see whether my quiet husband still noticed that other people found me attractive. Nathan always gave me the same serious answer. He said attention from strangers was not the problem. The problem was how much pleasure I took in bringing it home. I told him he was turning harmless comments into threats because he had forgotten how to laugh. People were already laughing whenever I told the stories at school, so they could not have been as cruel as he claimed. The reaction became a kind of reward. Nathan might ignore my new haircut or answer a question without looking away from his laptop, but the moment I suggested another man understood me better, his attention sharpened, his shoulders changed, his voice became careful. For a few minutes, I was no longer background noise in my own marriage. One evening, Nathan came home almost 2 hours late after another compliance meeting. I had cooked pasta, then left it untouched on the stove while I waited. When he entered, he apologized and explained that an internal review had taken longer than expected. I told him the athletic director had offered to take me out while I was waiting for a husband who remembered dinner. Nathan stopped removing his coat. He asked whether the man had actually invited me somewhere. I said maybe. Then I added that at least another man noticed when I was alone. Nathan placed his phone on the entrance table and straightened it until it was perfectly even with the edge. He asked why every argument now needed another man inside it. I told him because another man was sometimes the only thing that made him react. He said that answer frightened him more than the joke. I called him dramatic and served myself the pasta. The next day, I turned the argument into a funny story in the staff lunchroom. I told my co-workers that my serious husband needed an imaginary competitor before he remembered he had a wife. Sarah, the history teacher, laughed and asked whether Nathan was really that jealous. I said he was calm until I mentioned upgrading. Then he suddenly became a man with emotions. People were already laughing. and that made the story feel safe. One teacher said I was brave. Another said she would never risk saying something like that to her husband. I liked the word brave because it made provocation sound like independence. By lunch, the story had grown. I said Nathan should be grateful I was loyal because I could probably replace him before he noticed I had left. Sarah laughed again, but Principal Patel was standing near the doorway. She did not join us. She only looked at me for a second before asking whether the drama club budget forms were ready. I said they would be finished by Friday. Her face remained professional, but the room became quieter after she left. Wren loved every version of the story. She said Nathan had become too comfortable and that men only protected relationships when they believed they could lose them. My younger sister had once dated a man who questioned every friend and checked every message. Since leaving him, she treated any boundary from a man as disguised control. When I told her Nathan had asked me to stop joking about cheating, Wren said he was trying to control the subject because the subject exposed his weakness. She encouraged me to keep pressing until he admitted he was afraid. I told her I did not want to hurt him. I only wanted proof that I still mattered. Wren said those were the same thing only if Nathan chose to make them the same. That explanation suited me. Matteo became useful without knowing it. He had been Nathan's best friend since childhood and owned a busy restaurant near the school. Matteo was loud where Nathan was careful. He greeted everyone by name, told stories with his whole body, and could make a table laugh before the drinks arrived. Nathan trusted him completely. That made him the perfect comparison. A week later, I met Wren for lunch at Matteo's restaurant. Matteo joined us for several minutes because the afternoon was slow. He asked about the school gala and offered to donate food for the reception. I thanked him and said Nathan should borrow his personality for one evening. Matteo laughed. Wren told him that my husband had become so serious I needed to threaten him with replacements just to keep him awake. Matteo smiled at first, but Eleanor, who was checking inventory behind the counter, stopped writing. I said Nathan knew I was joking. Technically, comparing two friends was not betrayal. Matteo asked whether Nathan laughed at those jokes. I told him Nathan rarely laughed at anything anymore. Eleanor looked at me and said that did not answer the question. I changed the subject to the gala menu. When I returned home, Nathan asked how the school planning meeting had gone. I said it had been useful. He wanted to know who attended. I mentioned Wren and left out Matteo because I did not want another speech about boundaries. The decision was simple. I had done nothing wrong, so there was no reason to offer details that would only create conflict. Nathan waited, then asked whether Matteo had joined us. I looked at him and asked how he knew. He said Matteo had messaged him about donating food to the school. My quiet husband then asked why I had changed the story. I told him I had not changed anything. I had simply not listed every person who walked past the table. Nathan straightened the salt and pepper shakers between us before saying Matteo had described a full conversation. He asked whether I had compared them again. I said Matteo had laughed. Nathan replied that people sometimes laughed because refusing would make the room more uncomfortable. I told him he was inventing pain because he wanted control over my friendships. He then named one specific sentence I had used at school. He said I had told 3 co-workers that I would replace him if I found a more exciting man with better insurance. I stared at him because I had only said it inside the staff room. Nathan asked whether the sentence was true. I told him it was obviously humor. He asked why I kept repeating jokes after he had clearly asked me to stop. I said because his request did not make him the owner of my voice. The serious one did not argue. He straightened his phone, picked it up, and left the room. The next morning, Principal Patel called me into her office. She asked whether things at home were stable. Then she repeated the exact line about replacing Nathan with a more exciting husband. I assumed he had started telling people private details because he could not win our arguments alone. Instead of making me careful, it made me angry. If Nathan wanted to turn my jokes into a public story, I would make sure the next one belonged entirely to me. This time, I would use the one man he could never dismiss as imaginary, Matteo. I planned the dinner carefully because the best jokes need the right audience. Nathan invited Matteo and Eleanor, while I added Ren and another couple from our neighborhood. My quiet husband grilled steaks in the yard, arranged the plates, and placed the small brass dinner bell in the center of the table. He said it reminded him of our old Friday nights at the comedy club. I said the bell deserved to be used again because our marriage had become too serious. Nathan looked at me for a moment, then straightened it so its handle faced the center of the table. He always needed objects to behave when people did not. Matteo arrived carrying wine, talking loudly before he had even removed his coat. Eleanor followed him with a dessert box and a tired smile. Ren came last and whispered that the evening needed something memorable. I told her I already had an idea. Dinner began calmly. Nathan asked Matteo about the restaurant. Eleanor described a problem with one supplier. The other couple talked about renovating their bathroom. Everything was polite, smooth, dull. Nathan moved around the table, refilling glasses and checking whether everyone had enough food. He looked more like a careful waiter than my husband. Matteo told a story about a customer who had proposed inside his restaurant and then discovered he had forgotten the ring. Everyone laughed. Nathan smiled once, small and controlled. I watched him and wondered how many evenings we were supposed to spend pretending that a polite smile was the same as happiness. Ren brought up honesty in marriage. She said couples should be able to tell each other anything without becoming offended. Nathan replied that honesty depended on whether someone wanted connection or only wanted a reaction. I knew the comment was aimed at me. I asked whether a joke could truly damage a strong marriage. Nathan said a joke stopped being harmless when only one person was allowed to enjoy it. Matteo looked down at his plate. Eleanor glanced toward me. People were already uncomfortable, so I decided the fastest way to restore the energy was to make them laugh. I said that if I ever cheated, at least Nathan would not have to worry about a stranger. I would choose Matteo because he knew how to make a woman feel alive. The room became silent. Not quiet. Silent. Matteo's hand stopped around his glass. Eleanor lowered her fork. Nathan looked directly at me. His face stayed calm, but the skin near his jaw tightened in the way I had learned to recognize. There it was. Proof. Ren laughed first. It was loud and sudden, almost forced, but it opened the door. The neighbor gave a nervous smile. Matteo asked whether I was serious. I told him of course not. Technically, choosing someone in a made-up situation was not the same as wanting him. Nathan asked why I had chosen his closest friend for the joke. I said because Matteo was sitting there and everyone knew he was attractive. Matteo shifted in his chair. Eleanor looked at him, not at me. Nathan asked whether I had ever spoken to Matteo privately about being together. Matteo answered immediately that I had not. I reached for the brass bell and rang it twice. The sound cut through the room. I announced that the joke deserved full points because it had finally made the serious one react. Ren laughed again, but this time she covered her mouth after seeing Nathan's expression. My husband did not argue. He placed his fork beside the plate and adjusted it until it matched the knife perfectly. Then he asked Elena whether her phone had recorded the entire conversation. Elena looked toward the sideboard where her phone stood against a vase. She had started recording earlier when Ren told a story about her new boyfriend. Elena said the camera was still running. Nathan asked her not to delete the complete video. I laughed and told him he was treating a dinner joke like an official interview. He said he wanted the full moment preserved because I had a habit of changing jokes after people stopped laughing. I asked whether he planned to study my tone later. Nathan ignored the question and asked Matteo to confirm again that nothing had ever happened between us. Matteo said nothing had happened and nothing would. The speed of his answer irritated me. I told everyone Nathan had finally made the evening awkward. Elena replied that the evening became awkward before he spoke. That line landed harder because she said it without anger. Ren reached for her wine instead of defending me. I reminded them that people had been laughing. Nathan said they had laughed because I had placed them inside a situation where silence would look worse. Matteo pushed his plate away and said he did not want his name used in arguments between us. I told him nobody was arguing. Nathan corrected me. He said I had chosen his best friend as the weapon because imaginary men no longer produced enough of a reaction. The word weapon changed the table. Matteo looked at me differently. Elena picked up her phone from the sideboard and checked that the recording had saved. I said Nathan was proving my point by making one sentence emotional. He told me the sentence itself was not the whole problem. The problem was the pleasure on my face after I saw that it hurt him. I did not deny enjoying the reaction. Why should I? For months I had asked for attention in normal ways and received calendars, plans, and practical solutions. One joke had made him look at me like I still mattered. After dinner, the guests left earlier than planned. Matteo hugged Nathan at the door but only waved at me. Eleanor carried the dessert box out unopened. Ren stayed for 5 extra minutes, then said the joke had sounded sharper in the room than when I described it before dinner. I told her she was allowing Nathan's mood to change her memory. She said maybe, then left without laughing. Nathan found me clearing glasses from the table. He asked whether I understood what I had done to Matteo and Eleanor. I said their relationship was not my responsibility. He said neither was his pain, apparently. I told him his ego was too fragile if one imaginary affair could humiliate him. My quiet husband straightened the bell beside the empty plates and said the affair might be imaginary, but my intention was not. I ended the conversation by taking the bell away from him. The next morning I watched the dinner recording on Elena's social page before she removed it. The complete clip made the silence look longer than I remembered. Nathan looked controlled. I looked pleased. I did not like that version. So I used the short section where Ren laughed and cut everything after Nathan's first reaction. I posted it with the caption saying that my husband knew his best friend was the better option. Within an hour, people were already laughing again. Matteo messaged me and asked me to delete it. I told him the post was harmless and that nobody believed it was real. Elena sent one sentence saying she still had the full recording. I put my phone face down. By lunchtime, co-workers, parents, and people from Nathan's office had begun sharing the clip. The joke no longer belonged to one dinner table. That was fine with me. If Nathan wanted everyone to believe I was cruel, I would make sure they saw how easily he had allowed one sentence to break his calm. The complete dinner video reached more people by Monday morning. Eleanor sent it to Matteo's restaurant staff after customers began asking whether he was involved with me, and someone forwarded it to the school. The short clip I had posted still showed Ren laughing and Nathan going quiet, but the full version showed everything before and after. It showed me waiting for his reaction. It showed me ringing the brass bell myself. It showed Matteo pulling away from the joke while I kept pushing. People were already discussing it, so I decided silence would make me look guilty. I posted a statement saying I was sorry that my quiet husband's insecurity had caused an ordinary joke to be misunderstood. Technically, it was an apology. I used the word sorry. I explained that Nathan and Matteo had been friends for years and that no reasonable person would believe anything had happened. I also wrote that women should not be punished for humor simply because men disliked being compared. The post received supportive comments at first. Ren added a heart. 2 co-workers said people needed to relax. Then Elena uploaded the complete clip beneath my statement. She did not write an insult or explain her opinion. She only added the date and said the video had not been edited. The support slowed. People watched longer than they commented. At school, Principal Patel called me into her office before first period. The office smelled of coffee and printer paper, and the gala seating chart covered most of her desk. She asked whether I had used a school social account to share any part of the dinner story. I said no. My private page was connected to several teachers and parents, but technically, it was not an official school platform. She said the distinction mattered less when my profile identified me as the theatre director, and when the argument involved the sponsor's corporate representative. Nathan's company funded most of the annual arts gala, and Caleb Morgan, his colleague, managed the partnership. I told her my marriage had nothing to do with the school. Principal Patel replied that I had brought the conflict into the school by discussing it with staff, posting during working hours, and allowing parents to connect my husband's name with a public cheating joke. I said people were already laughing before Nathan decided to act wounded. She asked whether laughter was the only measure I used for harm. I told her she was taking his side without hearing mine. Principal Patel said she had heard several versions of mine already. That sentence stayed with me because I did not know who had given her the others. When I returned to the drama classroom, Sarah sat at another table instead of beside me. She said she needed space to grade papers. The excuse was weak, but I did not challenge it. Matteo stopped answering casual messages. When I asked whether he had seen my apology, he replied that I needed to stop using his name. Eleanor did not answer at all. Ren still replied, but not as quickly. A joke that once received 5 laughing emojis now received 1 word several hours later. Fine. Busy. Later. I blamed Nathan because withdrawal was his favourite weapon, and now everyone around him seemed to be copying it. That weekend, Marianne asked me to visit her garden. Nathan was already there repairing a loose board near the tool shed. His mother poured tea and told me she was not going to pretend her son had been a perfect husband. She said Nathan had spent years turning feelings into tasks and expecting reliability to replace closeness. I agreed immediately. At least one person understood. Then Marianne said, my loneliness explained why I wanted a reaction, but it did not explain why I kept choosing the reaction that hurt him most. I told her Nathan only reacted when I mentioned another man. She asked whether that made the subject useful or dangerous. I said it made it honest. Marianne looked toward the garden, where Nathan was tightening a screw with his head lowered. She said I had found his deepest fear and started using it like a doorbell whenever I wanted attention. I told her that was unfair. My quiet husband had created the emptiness first. Marianne agreed again, which made the rest harder to dismiss. She said he had built the silent room, but I had decided to set off an alarm inside it. On the drive home, Nathan said nothing until we reached a red light. Then he asked whether I planned to continue posting about Matteo. I told him I had already apologized. He said the apology blamed him for being humiliated. I said people misunderstood because he acted as if the joke confirmed something real. Nathan straightened the parking receipt lying near the gear shift and asked whether I could describe one version of the event without making someone else responsible. I told him he was using calmness to make me sound irrational. He said he had stopped trying to sound married because every conversation became material for my next performance. That evening, I found him alone in the living room. The lamps were off and only the television screen reflected against the window. The brass bell rested in his hand. Beside him lay an old note I had written after one of our first comedy nights. I recognized the paper because I had drawn a crooked star in the corner. The note said his laughter made me feel like the most important person in the room. Nathan ran his thumb over the fold but did not see me standing in the hallway. For several seconds, the distance between that note and the dinner video became difficult to avoid. I had once wanted to make him laugh. Now I measured success by how long he stayed hurt. My phone vibrated. A parent had commented that teachers should be allowed private lives and that Nathan needed a sense of humor. I read it twice, took the note from beside the bell, and placed it inside the drawer. Then I posted another statement saying some husbands punished funny wives with silence because they could not control them openly. The moment passed. 2 days later, I saw Nathan speaking privately with Principal Patel inside the empty auditorium. The stage lights were on, filling the room with the smell of warm dust and old curtains. Nathan stood near the front row while she held a folder connected to the gala sponsorship. They stopped when I entered. I asked whether my husband was discussing our marriage with my employer. Principal Patel said they were reviewing the gala partnership. Nathan did not add anything. I told him using his company's money to frighten me was low, even for the serious one. He carefully aligned the folder with the edge of the seat beside him and asked whether I understood the pattern. He said I provoked him, waited for him to object, then turned the objection into another public joke. After that, I used the reaction as proof that the original insult had been correct. I said he was only angry because people finally saw how dull he was. Nathan looked at the empty stage and said he would no longer explain himself inside conversations I planned to edit later. That night, he moved into the guest room. Before closing the door, he removed our framed comedy club photograph from the hallway and carried it with him. I assumed he was trying to make the house feel empty so I would apologize properly. Instead, I began planning the gala. If Nathan wanted Principal Patel, Matteo, and everyone else to hear the complete story, I would give them a version they could not ignore. The school gala gave me the audience I needed. Parents, teachers, sponsors, students, Matteo, Elena, Marianne, and Nathan would all be in the same room. I wrote a final joke saying my quiet husband should be grateful Matteo had standards, because otherwise I might have upgraded years ago. Technically, it was only an exaggerated version of what people were already discussing. Matteo refused when I asked him to join me on stage. He said I had used his name enough and wanted no part in another joke about betraying his oldest friend. I told him his refusal made Nathan look even more insecure. Matteo ended the call. The evening before the gala, Nathan found me rehearsing beside the podium. The brass bell stood near my script. He straightened the program with the edge of the table and asked me not to use the stage to continue our private conflict. Then he made one final offer. He admitted that he had spent years hiding behind work and calmness. He said I had been forced to beg for any visible sign that I still mattered to him. That part was true, and he did not try to deny it. He offered counseling and promised one complete conversation without phones, schedules, or silence. In return, I had to tell the audience that the story about Matteo was invented to provoke him. I said a husband who loved me would have shown emotion before I needed to create it. Nathan asked whether humiliating him had finally made me feel loved. I called the question another way of blaming me for his coldness. He lowered his voice instead of arguing. Then he aligned the brass bell with the center of the podium and said I should invite everyone who had heard any version of the joke. He told me to repeat it exactly as I had repeated it online. I heard surrender. My voice became stronger while his became quieter. Before bed, I sent Ren the final line and asked which version would hurt Nathan more. The message showed as read. No answer came. On gala night, the auditorium filled until almost every seat was taken. Nathan arrived with Matteo, Eleanor, Marianne, Principal Patel, and Caleb from the sponsoring company. I placed both hands on the podium and looked at the people who had doubted my version. The bell waited beside my script. Everyone who mattered was finally present. This time Nathan would not be able to hide inside silence. The gala moved smoothly until the final speech. Students had performed, parents were smiling, and people were already laughing at my opening jokes. Nathan sat in the front row beside Matteo. I left the prepared script on the podium and said, marriage required humor. Then I told the audience my quiet husband should be grateful Matteo had standards, because otherwise I might have upgraded years ago. I rang the brass bell twice. Nobody laughed. Nathan stood and walked onto the stage. He carefully aligned the bell with the edge of the podium, then smiled. He began with the man from the coffee shop who had never existed. Marianne already knew that story. Principal Patel knew about the jokes I had told at school. Elena still had the complete dinner recording. Caleb had heard what people at Nathan's office were saying. Then Matteo held up a message I had sent him, explaining that mentioning him at the gala would finally make Nathan lose control. I reached for the microphone and said the message was another joke. Principal Patel asked why every person in the room had received a different explanation. My hand remained around the microphone, but no words came. Nathan said he had stopped arguing because every private conversation gave me another chance to rewrite what happened. Instead, he had told the complete story to every person I pulled into it. He had not spread rumors. He had only removed my control over the ending. Principal Patel announced that I was being removed from the theatre program pending a professional conduct review. Matteo stepped onto the stage, placed an old photograph of himself and Nathan beside the bell, and said he had never wanted me or agreed to become a weapon against his friend. Then he left with Elena. I searched the auditorium for Wren. Her seat was empty. Nathan stated that the civil complaint and formal takedown demand would be delivered the next morning. I moved into a furnished studio near the school. My theatre stipend ended during the review. Wren stopped answering, while our mutual friends remained with Nathan. Matteo blocked my number. The full gala recording replaced my edited dinner clip everywhere it had been shared. I had believed jealousy was proof that Nathan still loved me because it was the only thing that made him react. His final reaction was not anger. It was leaving my stage without giving me another line. Weeks later, the brass bell arrived inside a box of my belongings. It rolled across the studio floor and rang once,